My name is Olivia, 33 years old, and I work as a senior financial auditor in Chicago. Today I woke up alone in a hospital bed with broken ribs and a shattered collarbone. My parents ignored every emergency call from my hospital just because my sister needed help moving into her new house. So I called my lawyer to meet me right in the intensive care unit, and when they finally showed up, they learned exactly what their neglect cost them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The mechanical beep of the heart monitor pierced the thick fog in my brain. Beep, beep, beep. Every electronic sound was a heavy hammer striking the inside of my skull. I fluttered my eyes open, instantly blinded by the harsh fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit at Chicago Med. The left side of my body felt crushed under the weight of a massive freight train. Fragmented memories of the intersection flashed behind my eyelids. The screech of tires skidding across wet asphalt. The explosive shattering of safety glass raining down on my lap. The blinding headlights of the delivery truck running the red light and slamming directly into my driver's side door. I tried shifting my weight against the mattress, but sharp agony shot through my chest, forcing a ragged gasp from my dry throat. Clear plastic tubes snaked across my bruised arms, delivering pain medication that barely dulled the burning sensation radiating from my fractured bones. The silence of my hospital room was deafening. There were no hushed voices of worried family members lingering near the door. There were no anxious parents pacing the linoleum hallway outside, waiting for the doctor to give them an update on my condition. There was only the cold, sterile hum of medical machinery, keeping a lonely watch over my broken body. I turned my heavy head slowly toward the rolling plastic tray table next to my bed. My personal belongings sat gathered in a clear plastic evidence bag. My mobile phone screen was severely cracked from the impact, but it still lit up when I reached over and pressed the side button. The bright glare stung my eyes as I unlocked the device and pulled up my call log. 20 outbound calls marked in red. 20 desperate cries for help. I dialed my father William 12 separate times. I dialed my mother Cynthia 8 times. Every single emergency call went straight to their voicemail boxes. The hospital administration staff tried reaching them repeatedly, too seeking consent for emergency procedures. Nothing. Total radio silence from the people who brought me into this world. My thumb hovered over the shattered glass screen, my heart pounding aggressively against my damaged ribs. Then a single text message notification popped up at the top of the display. It was from Cynthia. I opened the message, my breath catching painfully in my throat. The message read, "Stop calling. Brittany and Elijah are moving into their new house today. We are too busy. Figure it out." I stared at those glowing, merciless letters. Figure it out. Those 3 callous words perfectly summarized 33 years of my frustrating existence in this family. My younger sister Brittany, the undisputed pampered golden child of the household, was upgrading her superficial life with her flashy husband Elijah. That monumental event completely trumped my literal bloody fight for survival. The metallic taste of blood returned to my mouth as I remembered the agonizing moments trapped inside the wrecked shell of my sedan. I remembered the emergency medical technician leaning through my shattered window, his flashlight shining directly into my dilated eyes. He frantically asked me for an emergency contact while applying pressure to my wounds. I choked out my parents' numbers, while blood poured from a deep gash on my forehead, blinding my left eye. I genuinely believed that hearing their daughter was being pulled from twisted metal would finally make them care about me. I assumed that standing on the brink of death would transform William and Cynthia into the fiercely protective parents they had always been for Brittany. I was entirely wrong. As the cold IV fluid dripped into my vein, my analytical mind painted a vivid, sickening picture of exactly what my family was doing right now. They were probably standing proudly in the grand foyer of that overpriced suburban mansion, sipping expensive imported champagne, laughing loudly at Elijah's terrible jokes, and arguing passionately over which shade of beige curtains would look best in the spacious guest room. The stark contrast between their joyful celebration and my clinical reality was physically nauseating. Beep, the joyous echoing laughter in my head. Beep. The celebratory clinking glasses. Beep. The undeniable crushing reality that they were actively prioritizing fabric swatches and moving boxes over my survival. But the hot tears never came to my eyes. Instead, the lingering cloudy fog of the heavy painkillers completely vanished, swiftly replaced by a crystalline, icy, and terrifying focus. All the deep hurt, all the decades of being the family scapegoat instantly evaporated into thin air. I looked at the cracked, illuminated screen of my phone one last time. I did not text Cynthia back to plead for her attention. I calmly opened my contacts and dialed a number I knew by heart. The phone rang exactly twice before a deep, sharp professional voice answered the line. I gripped the heavy phone tightly, feeling the cool plastic dig into my bruised palm. My voice was raspy from the oxygen mask, but my tone was entirely steady and devoid of all emotion. Mitchell. It is me, Olivia. Bring the Project Phoenix files directly to Chicago Med immediately. They took the bait. The trap is officially set, and I am finally ready to watch this entire toxic empire burn to the ground. Mitchell pushed through the heavy ICU doors exactly 20 minutes after I ended my call. He looked entirely out of place in the sterile, brightly lit hospital environment. Instead, he dropped a thick, reinforced leather briefcase directly onto the rolling tray table. The dull thud echoed in the quiet room. He sat down and unclasped the briefcase locks. His dark eyes scanned the bandages wrapped tightly around my chest and the rigid brace securing my neck. We both knew the physical pain was entirely secondary to the financial war we were actively waging. They took the bait completely, Mitchell stated. The transaction on the property in Oak Brook was finalized at 9 o'clock this morning. Your sister and her husband are officially the owners of a $1.2 million estate. I forced a shallow breath past my fractured ribs. A $1.2 million estate that my brother-in-law somehow managed to finance. Tell me exactly how William and Cynthia made it happen. Tell me how my parents bought Brittany her dream house while ignoring the fact that I was bleeding out on a stretcher. Mitchell pulled a thick stack of stapled documents from his briefcase and laid them flat on the table. They committed federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. William orchestrated the entire scheme, and Cynthia facilitated the paperwork. In order to secure the predatory hard money loan required to purchase Brittany's new house, your parents needed massive collateral. Since they have steadily drained their own retirement accounts to fund Elijah's fraudulent lifestyle brands, they had zero liquid assets left to leverage. So they used yours. My heart gave a violent, painful lurch against my ribcage. Mitchell slid a glossy, high-resolution scanned document into my line of sight. It was a commercial property deed. It was the deed to the 12 acres of prime commercial real estate in downtown Chicago that my grandmother had left exclusively to me. When Grandma passed away, she bypassed my parents completely. She explicitly stated in her will that William would squander the land to fund Brittany's superficial whims. My parents had spent the last 5 years bitterly demanding I sign the land over to the family trust. I had refused every single time. They forged your signature on a cross-collateralization agreement, Mitchell explained, tapping the ink scrawl. They pledged your commercial land to a shadowy private equity firm to guarantee the $1.2 million loan. Your father bypassed the standard banking system entirely because a traditional bank would have required extensive identity verification. He went to a hard money lender who demanded exorbitant interest rates but looked the other way on the paperwork. They literally bet your entire inheritance on Brittany's new house. The sheer unadulterated audacity of their crime hit me like a second car crash. The heart monitor beside my bed instantly betrayed my rising fury. The steady, rhythmic beeping abruptly shifted into a rapid, high-pitched alarm. My chest heaved as I struggled to pull oxygen into my lungs. The idea that my parents had stolen my grandmother's legacy just so Brittany could host pool parties in Oak Brook made my blood boil hot enough to scald my veins. The heavy wooden door flew open. 2 ICU nurses rushed into the room, their faces etched with immediate panic. One nurse reached for the emergency button, while the other grabbed my wrist to check my pulse manually. "Miss, you need to calm down," The taller nurse instructed, her voice tense. Your heart rate is spiking to dangerous levels. You are putting too much stress on your fractured ribs. We need to administer a sedative right now. I ripped my wrist away from her grasp, fighting through a blinding wave of physical agony. I locked my eyes onto hers, forcing my voice to remain razor-sharp despite the jagged pain tearing through my torso. I do not want a sedative. I do not want to sleep. Turn off the alarm and leave the room immediately. I am perfectly fine. The nurse hesitated, looking nervously at Mitchell, who simply offered a cold, indifferent stare. Slowly, she reached up and silenced the screaming monitor. I took 3 deliberate breaths, forcing the fiery rage down into the pit of my stomach. I compacted the anger, compressing it until it turned into a solid, unbreakable block of pure tactical focus. I nodded to the nurses, silently dismissing them. They backed out of the room, closing the door softly behind them. Once we were alone again, I turned back to Mitchell. How did William plan to legitimize the fraudulent collateral document a notary public would eventually flag the forged signature? Mitchell smiled. That is exactly why they are going to walk through that door very soon, Olivia. The hard money lender requires a physical notarized signature on a secondary medical and financial proxy to finalize the lien recording. They knew you were in a severe car accident this morning. They ignored your emergency calls because they needed the house to close first. Now that the funds have been wired, they will come to this hospital playing the role of devastated loving parents. They will claim you are incapacitated by your concussion. They will shove a legal proxy in your face and tell you to sign it so they can handle your hospital bills. But the document will actually contain a retroactive consent clause for the commercial land lien. If you sign it, you legally validate their forgery. You give them your land and they get away with federal fraud. I stared at the closed hospital door, my mind calculating the exact trajectory of the psychological warfare my family was about to wage. They truly believed I was nothing more than an emotional, desperate daughter who would eagerly sign whatever they asked just to receive a crumb of their parental affection. They thought I was weak. Then the brass handle on the hospital door slowly began to turn. The heavy hospital door swung open. Mitchell stepped backward into the deep shadows behind the privacy curtain, rendering himself completely invisible from the doorway. I kept my eyes fixed forward as my family marched inside. They did not rush to my bedside. They did not gasp at the sight of my bruised face or the thick bandages wrapped tightly around my fractured chest. Instead, they strolled in with the casual, irritated energy of people stuck waiting in line. William entered first, checking his smartphone with a deep scowl. Cynthia followed, clutching a white Prada handbag against her cashmere cardigan. Then came Brittany, wearing a bright floral sundress that screamed celebration, utterly out of place among the grim medical equipment. Elijah trailed behind, audibly sighing as the door clicked shut. There were no flowers in their hands. There were no balloons. There was not a single trace of parental terror or sisterly concern. $45, Elijah announced, breaking the sterile silence. He aggressively tapped his leather driving shoes against the linoleum. I cannot believe this hospital charges $45 for valet parking. It is robbery. We are only going to be here for 10 minutes. Brittany dramatically pinched her nose. Elijah is right, she whined, her voice echoing with that familiar nasal pitch. It smells absolutely repulsive in here, like bleach and sickness. I spent 3 hours getting my hair blown out for moving day photos, and now this toxic air will ruin my aesthetic. This was supposed to be my new house day, Olivia. Why did you have to drive in the rain today? I stared at my younger sister. My left lung screamed with every breath I took, but I refused to break eye contact. I did not drive in the rain to ruin your aesthetic, Brittany. A commercial delivery truck ran a red light and crushed my car. I was almost killed. Cynthia waved her manicured hand through the air, dismissing my near-death experience like a pesky mosquito. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Olivia. The doctors told us you just have some broken bones. You are awake and talking so clearly. You are perfectly fine. We left the movers waiting on the front lawn of the new estate just to come check on you. You should be thanking us for making the trip down here instead of using that accusatory tone. My eyes shifted from Cynthia directly to Elijah. He was standing near the foot of my bed, crossing his arms over his chest in a defensive posture. As he moved, the harsh fluorescent hospital lights caught the gleaming, unmistakable face of a brand new solid gold Rolex watch strapped tightly to his wrist. The heavy timepiece sparkled with pure arrogance. It was the exact model I had seen featured in a luxury magazine last week, retailing for well over $10,000. "That is a very expensive watch, Elijah," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "It looks brand new." Elijah puffed out his chest, flashing a smug, rehearsed smile. "It is an investment piece, Olivia. An entrepreneur has to look successful to attract high-level investors. You have to spend money to make money." I turned my gaze toward my father, who was suddenly avoiding my eyes, pretending to read a medical chart on the wall. "An investment piece," I repeated, letting the bitter irony coat every single syllable. "That is fascinating, William. Do you remember when I was 18 years old? Do you remember when I sat in your home office begging you to simply co-sign my student loan so I could attend the state university? You looked me dead in the eye and said that funding my education was a terrible financial risk. You said I needed to learn the harsh realities of the real world on my own." William shifted his weight awkwardly, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "That was a long time ago, Olivia. You are bringing up ancient history to start a fight for absolutely no reason. I am bringing it up because you forced me to work 3 separate jobs just to pay for my own textbooks." I shot back, ignoring the sharp pain radiating through my ribs. "Yet you eagerly hand over tens of thousands of dollars to fund Elijah's completely fake lifestyle brand startups. He has not held a legitimate job in 4 years. He drains your retirement accounts to buy luxury watches and designer suits, and you smile and write the checks. You refuse to invest in your own daughter's education, but you enthusiastically finance a grifter just because he married your favorite child." Brittany gasped loudly, stepping forward with her fists clenched. "How dare you call my husband a grifter? You are just a bitter, jealous spinster sitting alone in a hospital bed. You have always been jealous of my success and my perfect marriage. There is absolutely nothing about your life that I am jealous of." "Brittany," I replied, my voice perfectly steady, "you are a 30-year-old woman who still uses your parents' credit cards to buy your groceries." William slammed his hand down on the plastic tray table, rattling my water pitcher. "Enough!" he roared, his face twisting with rage. "I will not stand here and listen to you insult your sister and your brother-in-law. We came here out of the goodness of our hearts to help you, and this is how you treat us. You are ungrateful and toxic." Cynthia stepped forcefully between my father and my bed, holding up both hands to stop the argument. She let out a long, heavy, exasperated sigh. "We do not have the time to deal with your ridiculous jealousy right now, Olivia," Cynthia said smoothly. She reached into her pristine white Prada handbag and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of dense legal documents. She slapped the papers down directly onto my lap. "We do not have all day, Olivia. Sign this, sweetie." The heavy stack of legal documents hit my lap with a muted thud, sending a fresh jolt of pain through my fractured ribs. I stared down at the crisp white pages. The thick black staple gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Cynthia tapped her manicured fingernail against the top sheet. Her voice dripped with that sickening, sugary sweetness she always used when she was trying to manipulate a situation to her advantage. "It is just a standard medical and financial proxy, Olivia," my mother cooed, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle in her cashmere cardigan. "The doctors told us you suffered a moderate concussion during the crash. You are heavily medicated. You are clearly in no condition to deal with the billing department or make complex decisions about your care. We simply want to take that stressful burden off your shoulders today. You just need to sign on the bottom line, and your father and I will handle all the ugly administrative details while you rest." Brittany groaned loudly from her spot near the door, shifting her weight. "Just sign it quickly, Olivia. The moving trucks charge by the hour, and Elijah needs to direct the decorators. You are so incredibly selfish for making us drag all the way down to the medical district on the most important day of my entire life. I have caterers arriving at the new house in exactly 3 hours." I kept my eyes glued to the documents resting on my bruised thighs. A medical proxy, a financial power of attorney. These were powerful legal documents that gave another person total unrestricted control over your assets and your life decisions. William moved closer to the bed, adopting his overbearing patriarch persona. He placed a heavy hand over my injured wrist, pressing down hard enough to send a warning flare of pain up my arm. "Let us be honest here, Olivia," he said, his voice dropping into a low, condescending register. "You have always been far too emotional when managing money. You lack the discipline required for serious financial decisions. We are doing this for your protection. You are hurt, you are single, and you need your family to manage your affairs before you make a terrible mistake and ruin your credit score." The sheer, unadulterated irony of his statement almost made me laugh out loud. I was a senior financial auditor for one of the largest accounting firms in the entire country. I spent my days forensically dismantling the complex tax structures of Fortune 500 companies. I managed corporate audits worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I found hidden assets that seasoned executives thought were buried forever. I was the one who caught a massive embezzlement scheme at a major tech firm just last year. Yet my father still treated me like a naive teenager who could not balance a simple checkbook. He truly believed his own delusional narrative because it justified his blatant favoritism. Elijah chuckled from the corner, adjusting his $10,000 Rolex. "Listen to your father, Liv. Let the adults handle the big boy paperwork so you can go back to sleep. You do not want to stress over hospital bills right now." I looked up at William. I let my shoulders sag against the stiff hospital pillows. I allowed my eyelids to droop, projecting the exact image of the exhausted, defeated, compliant daughter they desperately needed me to be. I took a shallow, shaky breath, letting my chest heave as if the effort was simply too much for me to bear. "Okay," I whispered, making my voice sound small and incredibly fragile. "If you really think it is for the best." Cynthia practically beamed with triumph, her entire posture relaxed. She swiftly unzipped her Prada bag and produced a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen. She leaned over the bed rails and pressed the cold metal barrel into my trembling hand. "I knew it," she said, exchanging a victorious, knowing glance with William. "You are finally being reasonable. Just sign on the sticky tabs, sweetie. It will only take a second." I gripped the heavy pen. My hand shook, playing the part perfectly. But instead of pressing the ink to the signature line on the cover page, I grabbed the top right corner of the packet. I flipped past the standard medical disclosures. I bypassed the boilerplate hospital indemnity clauses. I ignored the generic privacy waivers. I flipped directly to page 4. The thick legal jargon covered the page in tiny, single-spaced font. I knew this specific type of contract intimately. I had reviewed thousands of them in my corporate career. My eyes locked onto the specific paragraph buried deep within the text. William froze. His hand tightened instinctively on the metal bedrail. "Olivia, what are you doing? The signature line is on the front page. Stop playing around and sign the document." I ignored him. I cleared my throat, banishing the fake fragility from my voice completely. My tone became sharp, clinical, and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear perfectly. "I, the undersigned," I read aloud, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision, "do hereby grant retroactive consent to the placement of a primary commercial lien upon the property located at Sector 4, Downtown Commercial District. I further acknowledge and authorize the absolute use of said property as cross-collateralization for the primary residential mortgage issued by Apex Holdings, LLC." The temperature in the intensive care unit plummeted instantly. Brittany's annoyed huffing stopped dead. Elijah's smug smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unfiltered panic. Cynthia physically took a step backward, her hand flying up to cover her mouth in shock. William turned a sickly gray color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed facade of the caring parents shattered into jagged pieces on the hospital linoleum. I dropped the heavy gold pen on the floor. "I am not signing, and I know exactly what you did." The silence in the room became absolute. The fake, patronizing smiles instantly melted off their faces. William lunged forward, his large hands gripping the metal bed rail so tightly, his knuckles turned a sickly white. His face darkened into a deep, furious crimson, the blood rushing to his cheeks as his carefully constructed narrative crumbled. The gentle, concerned patriarch routine vanished completely, replaced by the ruthless dictator I had known my entire life. He leaned aggressively over my bed, casting a heavy, suffocating shadow over my battered body. "You will pick up that pen and sign this document right now, Olivia," he snarled, the thick veins in his neck bulging dangerously against his starched collar. "You owe this to us. This is about family loyalty, a concept you apparently fail to grasp. We gave you a highly privileged life, we provided for you, and you will absolutely not destroy your sister's future over a meaningless piece of commercial dirt you do not even use. You are being completely unreasonable and selfish. You simply do not understand the complex intricacies of real estate development and high-level financing. We leveraged an idle, worthless asset to secure our family prosperity. You should be thanking us for taking the initiative to manage your deadweight portfolio." Before I could formulate a response to his staggering hypocrisy, Elijah stepped smoothly to the side of the hospital bed. He placed a manicured, perfectly moisturized hand on William's trembling shoulder, playing the role of the calm, rational peacekeeper. He flashed his perfectly bleached white teeth, exuding that toxic, fake charisma he used to con unsuspecting angel investors out of their capital. "Come on," Liv Elijah said, his voice dripping with unbearable condescension. "We are family, and families are supposed to help each other level up in this world. You are looking at this situation all wrong. Do not be bitter just because you are single and sitting completely alone in a miserable hospital bed while Brittany is out there actively winning at life. We are building a massive generational legacy. You should feel incredibly proud to contribute your small part to our expanding portfolio, instead of acting like a petty, jealous victim." Brittany nodded vigorously from the doorway, her arms crossed defensively over her expensive floral dress. "Exactly," she chimed in, her tone sharp and vindictive. "You have always tried to ruin my happiness because you have absolutely nothing going on in your own pathetic, empty life. You just want to see me fail because you are entirely miserable." I turned my head slowly, locking my unblinking gaze directly onto Elijah. I actively ignored the agonizing, stabbing throb radiating through my fractured chest. "A portfolio," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dead, clinical, and terrifyingly calm register. "Let us talk about your magnificent portfolio, Elijah. Let us talk about the exact audited numbers. You claim to be a visionary entrepreneur building a corporate empire. Yet your very first lifestyle brand, Apex Essentials, burned through exactly $85,000 of my parents' money in merely 6 months before completely folding. Your second disastrous venture, the luxury fitness tracking application, required an initial $120,000 in raw seed capital. You funneled exactly $73,000 of that money directly into your personal offshore accounts to illegally cover your mounting gambling debts and your exorbitant sports car leases." Cynthia gasped loudly, her hand flying to her throat, but I did not stop my verbal dissection. "2 months ago, you successfully convinced William to liquidate the remaining $340,000 of his primary retirement account to secretly fund a fraudulent shell company. You then used that untraceable shell company to funnel monthly payments for your exclusive personal country club memberships and Brittany's endless designer shopping sprees in Paris and Milan. You do not have a portfolio, Elijah. You are nothing but a sophisticated financial parasite. You have completely bankrupted my parents, leaving them with absolutely zero liquid assets to their name. That is the only logical reason they had to commit federal wire fraud and forge my signature to illegally leverage my commercial land. You drained their accounts completely dry, and now you are desperately trying to steal my rightful inheritance to quietly cover your criminal tracks." The truth hit the hospital room with the force of an explosion. Elijah took a quick step backward, his smile obliterated by sheer terror. Brittany stared blankly at him, her jaw dropping open as the magnitude of his deception finally registered within her empty, superficial mind. Cynthia pressed her hands against her cheeks, unable to form a coherent defensive thought. But William simply snapped and lost his mind. The realization that I knew every single detail of their financial ruin shattered his last remaining thread of control. He let out a primal, terrifying shout of pure, completely unadulterated rage. He reached aggressively across the mattress and violently grabbed my left wrist. His thick fingers dug mercilessly into my bruised flesh, pressing directly over a deep purple contusion. A blinding white-hot flash of agony shot up my arm, forcing a sharp, breathless gasp from my lungs and tearing through my chest. He snatched the heavy gold pen from the floor and shoved it roughly against my palm, his red, contorted, and furious face inches from mine. "You ungrateful, wretched brat!" William spat spittle flying from his lips. "You are going to sign this paper right now, or I swear I will make you regret the day you were born in this miserable hospital. You will do exactly as I command, because I am your father." I gritted my teeth against the blinding pain, refusing to cry out again and give him the sick satisfaction. Then the heavy fabric of the privacy curtain in the corner rustled loudly. A tall figure stepped out from the dark, suffocating shadows. Mitchell adjusted his bespoke suit with a deadly, unnerving calm. "Remove your hand from my client," Mitchell commanded. Mitchell did not raise his voice. He stepped forward with the predatory grace of a man who destroyed corporate empires daily. He clamped his hand over William's wrist and squeezed a pressure point with brutal, calculated efficiency. My father gasped loudly, his fingers instantly flying open. The gold pen clattered onto the floor. William stumbled backward, clutching his injured arm, his face a mask of absolute bewilderment and pain. "Who the hell do you think you are?" William sputtered, failing to regain his towering posture under Mitchell's icy glare. "This is a private family medical matter. You need to leave this room immediately before I call hospital security and have you forcibly removed." "My name is Mitchell Vance," he replied smoothly, straightening his cuffs. "I am senior counsel at Vance and Sterling. More importantly, I am Olivia's personal attorney. If you lay a hand on my client again, I will call the police directly. I will have you arrested for aggravated assault on a hospitalized patient, and I will ensure you are dragged out of this intensive care unit in handcuffs while news crews film your departure." Cynthia rushed forward, placing a trembling hand on William's chest. "Now wait, just a minute. Mr. Vance," she said, her voice shaking violently as her matriarch persona collapsed. "You are entirely misunderstanding the situation. We are merely trying to help our daughter manage her complex medical affairs during this stressful time. We brought a standard medical proxy for her to sign so we can handle the billing department. There is no need for police involvement. We are a respectable family." Mitchell did not look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on my father. "Do not insult my intelligence, Cynthia. And do not dare insult my client's intelligence. There is nothing standard or respectable about what you brought into this room today. I have reviewed every page of that packet on Olivia's lap. I know exactly what is buried on page 4. I know exactly what you are attempting to execute right now under the guise of parental concern." Mitchell stepped closer, invading his personal space and forcing my father to look up. "You are attempting to coerce a hospitalized, medicated woman into signing a retroactive consent clause. You need her physical signature to validate the fraudulent cross-collateralization agreement you illegally manufactured yesterday morning. You deliberately forged Olivia's signature on a commercial property lien to secure a $1.2 million hard money loan. You bypassed banking identity checks and used a predatory firm to fund Elijah's residential real estate purchase. That is not a misunderstanding, William. That is textbook federal wire fraud. That is aggravated identity theft. That is a multitude of felony offenses carrying mandatory minimum prison sentences. You crossed state lines with the wire transfer, making this a federal jurisdiction case. You are staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, and bringing this fraudulent proxy into a hospital room only adds witness tampering and coercion to your catastrophic legal liabilities. The silence that followed Mitchell's ruthless legal dissection was completely deafening. The rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor seemed impossibly loud in the tense room. William looked physically ill, the aggressive red flush draining from his face, leaving him a chalky, sickly white. Cynthia sank backward against the pale wall, clutching her Prada handbag against her chest like a life preserver. Even Brittany remained silent, her eyes darting nervously between my father and my attorney, clearly horrified by the sudden mention of federal prison sentences. But Elijah flatly refused to accept defeat. He let out a loud, exaggerated laugh that echoed harshly against the sterile hospital walls. He stepped confidently into the center of the room, squaring his shoulders and crossing his arms arrogantly over his chest. He looked at Mitchell with complete, unadulterated contempt, adjusting his stolen gold Rolex watch to ensure it caught the harsh overhead light perfectly. "You are putting on a truly great show." "Lawyer," Elijah sneered, shaking his head slowly as if he were dealing with a slow child. "You know a lot of big, scary legal words. But you are completely missing the fundamental reality of business. You are entirely too late. You can throw around all the empty threats you want, but the mechanics of the transaction are already finished. The funds were formally approved yesterday afternoon. The electronic wire transfer cleared our designated accounts at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. The title company successfully received the money. The previous owners happily handed over the keys. The property is officially registered with the county clerk." Elijah smiled a vicious, triumphant smirk that made my stomach turn. "The $1.2 million estate in Oakbrook is legally in our name. Brittany and I own it outright. You cannot undo a closed real estate deal, lawyer. The money is gone. The luxurious house is absolutely ours. Olivia's commercial property is already holding the primary lien. You can try to fight it in civil court for the next 10 years, but by the time you untangle the endless paperwork, we will have already sold the property for a massive life-changing profit. You lose." Brittany instantly perked up, her blind confidence rushing back. She stepped up next to her husband and linked her arm tightly through his. "Exactly," she declared, proudly lifting her chin. "We finally won. You are just a bitter, incredibly jealous spinster, Olivia. You can keep your stupid, arrogant lawyer. We have our gorgeous dream home." I slowly reached down and picked up the heavy legal packet from my lap. I dropped it onto the rolling tray table. I ignored the agonizing, fiery pain erupting in my chest. I looked directly at my arrogant brother-in-law and smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. "You are absolutely right, Elijah. The deal is closed, the money is wired, the lien is officially recorded, the house is legally yours. But you clearly did not read the lender's name." Elijah snatched the document, scanning the cover page. He scoffed, throwing the packet down. "It says Apex Holdings, LLC. That is exactly who I negotiated with for 3 weeks. I read the name Olivia. It changes nothing about the fact that we won and you lost." Mitchell reached into his briefcase and produced a notarized sheet of paper. He slid it across the tray table, resting it perfectly on top of the forged proxy. "This is the corporate registration document for Apex Holdings, LLC." Mitchell stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Please direct your immediate attention to the section detailing the sole managing member and primary shareholder." William pushed Elijah aside and leaned over the table. His eyes darted frantically across the official state seals and the bold black text. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of a visitor chair. He collapsed into it, staring at me with a mixture of profound horror and complete paralyzing disbelief. "It is you," William whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "You are Apex Holdings." Brittany let out a sharp, confused laugh. "That is impossible. Apex is a massive private lending firm. They wired us $1.2 million in cash this morning. Olivia is just a corporate auditor. She does not have that kind of liquid capital sitting around in a bank account. She is lying to us to save face." "Elijah, tell them they are lying." Elijah did not speak. His eyes remained glued to the corporate registration document. His mouth opened and closed silently, his brain finally processing the catastrophic reality of their situation. "I do not just audit wealth, Brittany," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly even and devoid of sympathy. I generate it. I spent the last 7 years building a separate, lucrative financial consulting firm that operates independently from my corporate job. I built my own private fortune while you spent our parents' retirement money on designer shoes and status symbols. I have more than enough available liquid capital to easily fund a $1.2 million hard money loan. Cynthia gripped the edge of the hospital bed, her manicured nails digging fiercely into the mattress. I do not understand, she stammered, her eyes darting between my calm face and Mitchell's stern expression. Why would you do this? Why would you create a fake lending company just to give us the money we asked for? I did not create it just to give you money, Cynthia, I corrected her sharply. I created it to trap you. I knew exactly what William and Elijah were planning 6 months ago. Elijah is incredibly arrogant, but completely sloppy. He left a massive trail of digital inquiries regarding cross-collateralization and my commercial property deed on the family trust server. Because I am a senior auditor, my entire job revolves around tracking hidden digital financial footprints. I saw the searches. I knew you were desperately looking for a predatory lender who would willingly overlook the lack of my physical presence for the required signature. You knew, William gasped, clutching his chest. You knew we were going to forge your signature 6 months ago. I knew absolutely everything, I confirmed, letting the harsh reality sink deep into their bones. And instead of stopping you, I decided to let you proceed. I instructed Mitchell to legally establish Apex Holdings LLC. We positioned it perfectly in the exact shadow markets Elijah was desperately searching through. We offered the exact predatory terms he needed to bypass traditional banking regulations. You thought you found a brilliant loophole. You thought you outsmarted the entire financial system. But you walked directly into the cage I carefully built for you. I funded the loan with my own money. I bought your debt. I own the primary mortgage on Brittany's brand new house. And I hold the forged commercial lien that you illegally pledged as collateral. The silence in the intensive care unit was absolute and suffocating. The rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor was the only sound proving that time was still moving forward. The psychological warfare they had ruthlessly waged against me for decades had finally been turned back on them, and the impact was utterly devastating. They had dug their own graves entirely by their own greedy hands. Cynthia began to weep, real, desperate tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Olivia, please, she sobbed, reaching out pleadingly toward my bruised arm. We are your parents. We were just trying to help your sister get settled. We were in so much terrible debt because of Elijah's failed businesses. We did not know what else to do. You cannot possibly do this to us. I looked directly at my mother, feeling nothing but a hollow sense of closure. Do you remember what you texted me when I was sleeping in my car during college because you refused to help me pay my rent? You told me to figure it out, Mom. You said true independence was the greatest form of security. So I did exactly what you advised. I figured it out. And now you do not owe a faceless bank. You owe me. William suddenly lunged forward, falling heavily to his knees beside my hospital bed. He grabbed the metal railing, his knuckles stark white, genuine tears welling in his wide, panicked eyes. Olivia, listen to me, he pleaded, his booming voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. We made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. We were desperate and foolish. But you have all the power now. You own the company. You own the debt outright. Then just forgive the loan. We are your family. Please just wipe the slate clean and we can start over. I stared down at the man who had tormented and diminished me for my entire life. I slowly shook my head. Check the new financial default clause today. William stared at me blankly, his jaw trembling as the words failed to register in his panicked mind. I adjusted my posture against the stiff hospital pillows, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs, and stared back with zero sympathy. You signed a predatory hard money contract, William. I made sure the terms were uniquely punitive. Apex Holdings offered a staggering $1.2 million at an astronomical 24% interest rate. But the interest rate was never the real trap. The real trap was the accelerated repayment schedule and the immediate default triggers. You eagerly signed that paperwork without a second thought, because you firmly believed I would be the one trapped under its crushing weight. You thought you could forge my name, take the cash for Elijah, and leave me to either pay the extortionate premiums or lose my highly valuable commercial property. You planned to completely ruin my financial standing to buy your golden son-in-law a mansion. You never bothered to read the fine print because arrogant men like you never believe the rules apply to them. You assumed the lender was just another faceless corporate entity that would be tied up in slow bureaucratic red tape for months. You were entirely wrong. Let me explain the exact mechanics of your new financial reality. I continued, my voice steady and completely relentless. Section 8, Paragraph 4 of the Apex Holdings Master Agreement explicitly states that the first premium payment of $50,000 is due immediately upon the transfer of funds. Not in 30 days, not next week, immediately. The contract explicitly dictates a strict deadline of noon on the day following the wire transfer. If that initial premium is not deposited into the Apex Holding account by 12 o'clock sharp, the loan automatically enters immediate, irreversible default. The entire principal balance plus all accrued penalties and maximum legal interest becomes instantly due. William opened his mouth, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. But we were busy moving, he stammered defensively. We were coordinating decorators and moving trucks all morning. We did not have time to deal with banking transfers. I smiled, feeling a cold satisfaction settle deep into my bones. Yes, you were busy moving. You were busy popping expensive champagne in a house you stole using my name. You were also completely ignoring my phone calls. The hospital administration attempted to contact you 4 separate times this morning regarding my critical admission. You sent every single emergency call directly to voicemail because dealing with my severe injuries was too inconvenient for your grand moving day schedule. You thought you could just ignore me until you had the keys in your hand. But your blatant neglect sealed your absolute ruin. Because you were too busy ignoring your injured daughter, you completely missed the noon deadline. It is currently 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The horrific realization finally crashed over my parents like a suffocating tidal wave. Cynthia physically collapsed against the hospital wall, her knees buckling as she slid down to the cold linoleum floor. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a wretched guttural sob that echoed loudly in the sterile room. Brittany shrank away from Elijah, her eyes wide with mounting terror, as she stared at the man who had just bankrupted her entire future. Elijah stood completely paralyzed, his fraudulent swagger completely eradicated by the brutal, undeniable truth. For 35 years, I lived under your absolute control, I said, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. You dictated my worth. You openly mocked my career choices. You consistently prioritized a charismatic con artist over your own flesh and blood. You literally sat by and watched while this pathetic excuse for a man drained your life savings, and then you willingly committed major federal felonies just to maintain the toxic facade of our perfect wealthy family. You believed I was nothing more than a convenient disposable asset. You genuinely believed I was weak, emotional, and easily manipulated. You looked at my quiet dedication and mistook it for vulnerability. You thought my professional life was just a cute little hobby while you played with the real money. But while you were burning through cash and living a lie, I was mastering the system. I built an ironclad corporate fortress. I became the very predator you thought you could easily outsmart. William remained on his knees beside my bed, his chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. "Olivia, I am begging you," he cried out, his voice cracking pitifully. "We will lose absolutely everything. The family business, the residential properties, our entire legacy. You cannot just strip us of our entire life. I am your father. I raised you. You have to show us some mercy." I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. I felt absolutely no mercy, no hesitation, and no regret. The frightened, desperate daughter, seeking his conditional approval, had died the exact moment she saw the forged signature on that fraudulent loan document. "You showed no mercy stealing my identity," I replied coldly. "You showed no mercy abandoning me here today. You do not get to invoke family loyalty only when you are facing the devastating consequences of your own criminal greed. You chose your legacy, William. Now you get to pay for it. I nodded once towards my attorney. Mitchell adjusted his tailored suit jacket, his expression completely devoid of any emotion. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and smoothly pulled out a thick, crisp, freshly printed legal document. He stepped forward and extended his arm, handing the heavy paper directly down to William. My father took it with violently shaking hands. His eyes scanned the bold, capitalized letters printed across the top of the page. "That is an official notice of default," Mitchell stated firmly. "You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises." Elijah ripped the heavy paper directly out of William's trembling fingers. His eyes darted frantically across the densely typed legal jargon, desperately searching for a hidden loophole that simply did not exist. The flawless manufactured facade of the untouchable corporate visionary completely disintegrated right before my very eyes. He dropped the paper as if it were physically burning his skin and spun around to face his wife. His perfectly styled hair fell into his panicked eyes and his voice cracked with a pathetic high-pitched desperation. "You explicitly told me they had the money completely covered, Brittany." Elijah screamed, his chest heaving wildly as he pointed a shaking finger directly at her face. "You promised me your incredibly wealthy, highly successful parents were independently handling the entire underwriting process behind the scenes. You repeatedly swore to me that this massive loan was fully secured by their impenetrable family trust. I put my personal name on those residential deed documents. I signed my own life away on a massive luxury estate, assuming your father was footing the entire bill. You set me up to take the ultimate fall for a multi-million-dollar federal fraud scheme." Brittany recoiled violently, as if he had physically struck her across the face, her mouth falling open in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "Do not you dare try to pin this catastrophic mess on me!" she shrieked back, her voice echoing shrilly off the cold hospital walls. "You are the one who recklessly blew through every single cent we ever possessed. You are the one who forcefully demanded the corner lot mansion just to falsely impress your fake investor friends. You literally begged my father to miraculously find a way to finance your pathetic, thoroughly bankrupt lifestyle." Brittany abruptly turned away from her unraveling husband and locked her furious, completely unhinged gaze directly onto me. Her hands curled into tight, trembling fists at her sides, and her face contorted into a hideous mask of pure venomous hatred. "You maliciously planned this entire disaster from the very beginning," Olivia Brittany yelled, marching aggressively toward the foot of my hospital bed. "You are a sick, twisted, deeply jealous psychopath. You absolutely could not stand the simple, beautiful fact that I was finally getting my ultimate dream house. You could not properly handle the reality that I am happily married while you are destined to remain entirely alone. You deliberately orchestrated that horrific car crash just to trap us here inside this room today. You intentionally threw your vehicle directly into oncoming traffic so you could lay comfortably in this miserable bed and legally trick us into missing your ridiculous banking deadline. You are completely insane, and you have officially ruined the most important, spectacular day of my entire life." Cynthia frantically tried to grab Brittany's arm to forcefully pull her back, but the chaotic shouting match had already spiraled entirely out of control. The sheer, deafening volume of their screaming loudly reverberated down the normally quiet intensive care corridor. The heavy wooden door to my room flew open, and 3 frantic nurses rushed inside, their expressions tight with immediate professional alarm. The head nurse, a stern, imposing woman who had been diligently monitoring my vital signs all morning, stepped directly between my bed and my furious sister. "You need to back away from the patient right now," the head nurse commanded, holding up her hands to physically block Brittany's highly aggressive advance. "This is a secure critical care environment, not a public street fighting arena. My patient is currently recovering from severe life-threatening physical trauma, and your excessive screaming is causing her heart rate to spike dangerously high. I need absolutely everyone to vacate this room immediately." William foolishly tried to puff up his broad chest and actively assert his rapidly fading patriarchal authority. "We are absolutely not leaving until my daughter fixes this massive financial error," he demanded loudly, pointing his thick finger aggressively at the medical staff. The head nurse did not even blink at his pathetic, desperate display of dominance. She simply reached for the emergency communication radio firmly clipped to her blue scrubs. "Code yellow, intensive care room, 412, she spoke crisply and clearly into the device. "I need hospital security up here immediately to forcefully remove hostile family members." The undeniable looming threat of being physically dragged out of the public hospital by uniformed security guards finally pierced straight through the thick, impenetrable layer of their collective delusion. William stumbled backward, his broad shoulders slumping downward in total, irreversible defeat. Cynthia tightly covered her face and wept uncontrollably into her expensive designer handbag. Brittany stood completely frozen, her chest heaving with impotent rage as she fully realized she possessed absolutely no leverage left to wield. But Elijah stubbornly refused to accept his ultimate crushing downfall. He glared fiercely at my attorney, his jaw clenched tight with lingering toxic arrogance and foolish defiance. "You truly think you have won?" Elijah sneered, stepping aggressively into Mitchell's personal space. "You think a simple generic default notice actually scares me? I will legally tie this property up in federal bankruptcy court for the next 5 miserable years. You will never see a single shiny dime of your money, and you will certainly never get the physical keys to my gorgeous house." Mitchell did not even flinch. He calmly opened his sleek leather briefcase for the second time today. He purposefully pulled out another crisp, legally binding document and held it directly in front of Elijah's pale, excessively sweating face. "You fundamentally misunderstand the brutal nature of a hard money commercial loan," Mitchell stated, his firm voice utterly devoid of any basic human sympathy. "You explicitly waived your legal right to a prolonged bankruptcy hearing when you eagerly signed the accelerated forfeiture clause yesterday morning. Apex Holdings does not need to wait for a judge to legally seize your property." Mitchell pressed the heavy white paper firmly against Elijah's chest. "Notice of immediate foreclosure," Mitchell announced coldly. Elijah stared at the bold black letters, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Immediate foreclosure," he choked out, his voice cracking. "That is completely illegal. You cannot just instantly seize a residential property. There are grace periods. There are consumer protection laws. It takes months to evict someone in this state. You are bluffing." Mitchell adjusted his glasses. "You would be absolutely correct if this were a standard residential mortgage," Mitchell explained. "However, your father-in-law structured this transaction to bypass standard banking regulations. He secured a commercial hard money loan by pledging a commercial asset. Furthermore, he explicitly signed a waiver of residential rights to secure the exorbitant cash amount you required. Under the specific shadow market terms, he agreed to Apex Holdings retains the absolute right of immediate possession upon default. There is no grace period. There is no judge required. The property reverts to the lender the second the contract is breached." Elijah stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the wall. He looked at William, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and furious betrayal. "You signed away our rights," Elijah screamed. "You promised me this was a foolproof loophole. You guaranteed we were protected." William could not even look at his son-in-law. He remained slumped against the cold linoleum floor, muttering apologies to nobody in particular. Cynthia was violently sobbing, rocking back and forth as the reality of their utter financial ruin finally crushed her socialite facade. I shifted my weight on the hospital bed, but the physical pain was overshadowed by the intoxicating rush of absolute victory. I slowly raised my left arm and checked my watch. The digital display read 3:15. "Right now, as you stand here screaming at each other, I am already taking back what belongs to me," I announced. "I authorized my property management team to initiate the repossession protocol at 12:01. They arrived at your new estate 3 hours and 14 minutes ago." Brittany froze, her tear-streaked face whipping toward me. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "What do you mean they arrived at the estate?" "I mean they are changing the locks, Brittany," I said calmly. A crew of private security contractors and professional movers is currently walking through your dream home. They are systematically boxing up every single item you unpacked this morning. They are clearing out the gourmet kitchen. They are stripping the master bedroom. They are securing the premises on behalf of Apex Holdings. No. Brittany shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made the heart monitor beside my bed spike rapidly. No, you cannot do this. My custom-imported Italian leather sectionals were delivered today. My designer clothing is hanging in the closets. The interior decorators just finished staging the entire living room. You cannot let strangers touch my things. I turned my head toward the large hospital window. The sky outside had turned a bruised, ominous gray, and heavy droplets of rain had just started violently pelting the reinforced glass. It looks like the weather forecast was surprisingly accurate. I noted casually, turning my gaze back to my hysterical sister. It is a terrible day to move. Brittany let out a guttural, agonizing scream. She physically collapsed onto the hospital floor, her knees hitting the hard tile with a sickening thud. She curled into a pathetic ball, sobbing so violently, her entire body shook. "My beautiful thing," she wailed, pounding her fists against the ground. "It is pouring rain outside. My custom velvet chairs will be completely ruined. My silk rugs will be destroyed. Make them stop, Olivia. Please, I am begging you, make them stop." "You never begged me to stop when you were happily stealing my identity," I replied, my voice devoid of even a fraction of human empathy. "You never cried when you thought I would be the one losing my property to cover your massive debts. You gleefully spent my hard-earned money and planned to discard me the moment I became useless to your social climbing ambitions. You wanted the glamorous lifestyle so badly, Brittany. You just forgot you actually have to pay for it." The heavy wooden door to my intensive care room suddenly swung wide open. 4 large uniformed hospital security guards marched inside, their expressions hardened and strictly professional. The head nurse stepped in right behind them, pointing a firm finger directly at my family. "Remove them immediately," the head nurse commanded, her voice brooking absolutely no argument. "They are actively endangering a critical care patient. I want them escorted entirely off the hospital premises right now. If they resist, call the local police department and have them formally arrested for trespassing and assault." The security guards moved with swift, practiced efficiency. 2 of them grabbed William by the arms, forcefully hauling the broken man up from the floor. He offered zero resistance, his eyes vacant and dead. Another guard took Cynthia by the elbow, guiding her weeping, trembling form toward the bright hallway. The largest guard approached Elijah, who immediately threw his hands up in surrender, his cowardly nature fully exposed as he scrambled toward the exit without sparing a single glance back at his hysterical wife. Brittany was the last one remaining inside. She remained sprawled on the floor, looking up at me with desperate terror. "Olivia, please," she sobbed, reaching a shaking hand toward my bed. "You have proven your point. You have won. We have nothing left. How are we supposed to leave?" Elijah took the only car. "We do not have our wallets or our phones. Our new house is securely locked. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked down at the sister who had deliberately tormented me for my entire existence. I felt the cold, hard weight of absolute justice settle perfectly over my shoulders. "My movers will leave all your boxes on the curb tonight," I said with ice in my voice. "Try calling an Uber." Elijah stared as my statement finally penetrated his thick skull. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of absolute fury. He turned away from my hospital bed and locked his frantic eyes onto my father. The silence in the room stretched taut before Elijah snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing William by his tailored jacket lapels and shoving him against the wall. "You swore this money was clean!" Elijah roared, his spit flying into William's terrified face. "You looked me in the eye and promised this capital was secured through a legitimate offshore trust. And now you tell me you forged your daughter's signature to steal a loan from a predatory firm she secretly owns. You absolute fool! You dragged my pristine name into a massive federal fraud investigation. My entire professional reputation is ruined because of your incompetence. William tried to pry Elijah's fingers off his jacket chest, heaving with panicked breaths. "I was trying to save you." William choked out his voice a pathetic wheeze. "The bank rejected your mortgage application because your businesses are deeply in the red. I put everything on the line to get you that house." "You set me up!" Elijah screamed, shaking the older man violently. "You and your wife needed to play wealthy, generous in-laws, so desperately you willingly committed multiple felonies. Do you know what my partners will do when they find out a foreclosure notice was slapped on my primary residence? The SEC will audit every single account I manage. I will be facing decades in a federal penitentiary because you thought you could outsmart a senior auditor." Cynthia, who had been weeping into her hands, suddenly snapped her head up. She pushed herself off the linoleum floor and marched toward her son-in-law, her eyes blazing with unhinged fury. "Do not dare blame my husband for your pathetic existence," Cynthia shrieked, shoving Elijah hard in the chest to break his grip. "You are nothing but a flashy con artist playing dress-up with our money. You pressured us to secure that mansion because you needed a spectacular backdrop for your fake social media image. You demanded a $1.2 million estate to convince the world you were still a wildly successful entrepreneur." Elijah stumbled backward, his face flushing a deep, furious crimson. "I brought immense value to this family," he spat back defensively. "I gave you connections to the upper echelon of the Chicago elite. You gave us nothing but staggering debt!" Cynthia yelled, her voice echoing across the intensive care unit. "You manipulated my daughter into believing you were a titan of industry when you are actually drowning in terrible investments. We risked our legacy, our residential properties, and our reputation just to keep your pathetic house of cards from collapsing. And now you have the sheer audacity to stand here and play the victim. You are the sole reason we are completely bankrupted today. You dug this grave and you dragged our entire family down into the dirt with you." As the ugly truth of their toxic dynamic spilled into the open, Brittany remained frozen near the doorway. Her eyes darted wildly between her screaming mother, her humiliated husband, and her defeated father. The glamorous reality she had constructed for herself was burning to the ground right in front of her eyes. She let out a ragged whimper and dropped to her hands and knees. Ignoring the shouting match raging behind her, Brittany began to crawl across the cold hospital floor toward my bed. Her dress caught under her knees, but she did not care. She reached the side of my mattress and grabbed fistfuls of my hospital sheets, her knuckles turning white as she pulled herself up to meet my gaze. Her face was drenched in smeared mascara and tears, her expression contorted into one of primal desperation. "Olivia, please," Brittany sobbed, her voice cracking as she choked on her own tears. "Look at me, please. I am your sister. I am your little sister. We grew up together. We shared a room. You used to read me bedtime stories when we were kids. You cannot do this to me. You cannot make me homeless." I stared down at her trembling hands clutching my sheets. I felt no warmth, no nostalgia, and absolutely no pity. "I remember sharing a room with you, Brittany," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I also remember you watching Mom and Dad belittle my achievements while you smiled. I remember you laughing when they called my career a joke. I remember you turning a blind eye when they stole my college fund to buy your first car. You only remember our childhood now because your bank accounts are empty and your husband is a fraud." "Please," Brittany begged, burying her face into the edge of my mattress. "I will do anything. I will divorce him. I will sign the house over to you. Just do not put my things on the street. Do not leave me with absolutely nothing. I have nowhere else to go." "You have exactly what you earned," I replied coldly, pulling my sheets firmly out of her desperate grasp. The argument between Cynthia and Elijah reached a fever pitch, their voices blending into a roar of bitter resentment. William remained slumped against the wall, staring blankly at the ceiling as his entire world dissolved into chaos. Mitchell stood silently near the monitors, a professional sentinel bearing witness to their ultimate destruction. Suddenly, the rhythmic thud of heavy boots echoed down the pristine hospital corridor. The sound was sharp, deliberate, and undeniably authoritative. The screaming in the room abruptly faltered as the wooden door to my intensive care unit was pushed wide open, hitting the rubber wall stop with a loud, definitive crack. Two fully armed Chicago police officers stepped into the room, their hands resting cautiously on their heavy utility belts. Their stern, sweeping gazes locked instantly onto William and Elijah. The officers stepped fully into the room. The taller one held a thick manila folder. William stood up straighter, adjusting his posture to project the authority he had wielded just hours ago. He cleared his throat, plastering on a fake, condescending smile. "Officers, I am glad you are here," William announced. "We were having a minor domestic disagreement. My daughter is on heavy medication and has become somewhat hysterical. I apologize if the noise disturbed the other patients. We were leaving." The tall officer did not blink at the lie. He stepped directly past Brittany and stopped mere inches from my father. "Are you William Stirling?" the officer asked, his voice a resonant baritone that commanded absolute compliance. William puffed out his chest. "Yes, I am William Stirling," he replied with an arrogant nod. "I am the CEO of Stirling Enterprises and a donor to the Police Benevolent Fund. If you need to speak with hospital administration about the noise complaint, I can easily handle the fine." "We are not here for a noise complaint," Mr. Stirling, the officer stated flatly, his hand moving to the handcuffs on his utility belt. "We are executing a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are officially charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery." The remaining color drained from William's face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. He stumbled backward, bumping into a rolling medical tray. "What are you talking about?" William gasped, his voice cracking. "That is impossible. This is a massive misunderstanding. You have the wrong man. I am a respected businessman in this city." Mitchell stepped forward, his leather shoes clicking sharply. "There is no misunderstanding," William Mitchell said calmly. "I filed the criminal complaint with the federal prosecutor's office the moment the fraudulent wire transfer was completed this morning. Apex Holdings provided the authorities with digitally traced IP addresses, the forged commercial lien documents, and irrefutable proof that you deliberately impersonated Olivia to secure $1.2 million. You left a digital footprint a mile wide." William's mouth opened and closed silently. He shook his head wildly, raising his hands in a frantic defensive gesture. "No, you cannot do this to me," William stammered, stepping away from the advancing officers. "My lawyers will destroy you. I will have your badges for this. Do you know who I am?" "Turn around and place your hands flat against the hard wall," the second officer commanded loudly, unholstering his heavy handcuffs with a metallic clink. William absolutely refused to comply. He aggressively shoved the officer's arm away. "Do not touch me," he roared, his face turning purple. "I am not going anywhere." The officers did not hesitate. The tall officer grabbed William by the shoulder, spun him around forcefully, and slammed him face first into the hard drywall. The impact rattled the framed medical charts hanging near the door. William let out a shocked grunt as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrist, trapping the wealthy patriarch like a common street criminal in the middle of a crowded intensive care unit. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited loudly, his voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Cynthia let out a blood-curdling shriek. She threw herself across the room, her designer heels slipping dangerously on the floor. She lunged at the arresting officers, desperately trying to pry their hands off her husband. "Stop it!" she screamed, batting wildly at the tall officer's tactical vest. "Let him go right now. You are hurting him. He is a good man. He did not do anything wrong. We just needed the money for the house. It was a family loan." The second officer grabbed Cynthia by the waist, dragging her away from William. She thrashed and kicked, sobbing uncontrollably as her perfect suburban life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Cynthia fell to her knees, her manicured hands gripping the hem of my hospital blanket. "Olivia, please!" Cynthia wailed, her voice thick with hysterical desperation. "Look at what they are doing to your father. Tell them to stop. Tell them you authorized the signature. Tell them this is just a terrible misunderstanding. You have all the power here. You cannot let them take him away in handcuffs. He will not survive in prison. I am begging you, Olivia, save him. I stared down at the woman who enabled my father's abuse for 3 decades. The woman who watched me cry over stolen college funds and laughed at my pain. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, I repeated softly, my voice dripping with icy contempt. Like the time he convinced the extended family I was mentally unstable just to cover up his own gambling debts. No, Cynthia. I will not lie to save a man who would gladly sell my soul for a profit. I hope he rots in prison. William was hauled upright, his tailored suit jacket torn and wrinkled, his dignity completely stripped away. The officers marched him roughly toward the exit, ignoring his pathetic, whimpering pleas for his attorney. Cynthia collapsed onto the floor, wailing his name. Brittany remained paralyzed by the foot of my bed, her mind shattered by the loss of her beloved mansion and the sudden arrest of her protector. Amidst the chaotic screaming and agonizing sobs, a subtle movement caught the corner of my eye. While Brittany wept and Cynthia tore at her own hair, Elijah remained entirely silent. His flashy persona had evaporated, replaced by the instinct of a cornered rat. He slowly took a step backward. His eyes were locked solely on the open doorway. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah kept slowly backing up, inching his way out into the busy hospital corridor, fully prepared to slip into the crowd, abandon his weeping wife, and just completely vanish. Going somewhere, Elijah? My voice sliced through the cacophony of the intensive care unit, sharp and commanding enough to freeze him mid-step. The 2 police officers instantly turned their attention from my handcuffed father to the doorway where my brother-in-law was attempting his cowardly escape. Elijah froze, his foot hovering above the linoleum threshold. He slowly turned his head back toward my hospital bed, his face a mask of caught panic. I promised you a complete reckoning, I said, pushing myself up slightly against the stiff pillows. Did you honestly believe I would dismantle my father's fraudulent empire and simply ignore the parasitic leech who engineered the entire scheme? Mitchell stepped forward, adjusting his glasses with clinical precision. You should step back inside the room, Mr. Vance Mitchell advised, his tone chillingly polite. Fleeing the scene of an active federal arrest will only compound the extensive charges currently being filed against you. We have spent the last 72 hours conducting a forensic audit of your supposedly spectacular investment firm. My team of private investigators looked deeply into your personal and professional finances. Elijah swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. I have absolutely nothing to do with William's real estate fraud, Elijah stammered, raising his hands defensively as one of the officers took a step toward him. I am a victim here. William lied to me about the source of the funds. I am completely innocent. You are a remarkably pathetic liar, I replied, locking eyes with him. You knew exactly where that money was coming from, and you knew precisely how to exploit it. But what you did not anticipate was that my investigators would trace the flow of capital after it hit your accounts. Brittany, still kneeling on the cold floor beside my bed, slowly turned her tear-streaked face toward her husband. What is she talking about? Elijah, Brittany whispered, her voice trembling with confusion and fresh dread. What finances? Let me illuminate the situation for my dear sister, I announced, fixing my gaze on Brittany's bewildered face. Your husband did not just pressure our father into committing wire fraud to secure your precious dream home. He also used the opportunity to rob his own family blind. When the $1.2 million loan was deposited into your joint account, Elijah immediately siphoned $300,000 of that capital into a shadow corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. He claimed it was an aggressive hedge fund strategy to protect your assets. In reality, it was a slush fund designed to finance his secret life. Elijah lunged forward, his face twisted in desperation. "Shut your mouth, Olivia!" he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Do not listen to her, Brittany. She is trying to destroy our marriage because she is a bitter, jealous sociopath." Mitchell calmly opened his leather briefcase and extracted a thick stack of glossy photographs and banking statements. He tossed them onto the foot of my hospital bed. They scattered across the white blanket, revealing undeniable proof. There were bank transfer receipts, flight itineraries, and crystal-clear images of Elijah lounging on tropical beaches, dining at five-star restaurants, and walking hand-in-hand with a stunning brunette woman. Those frequent business trips to Miami and Aspen. I continued, my voice merciless and steady. The ones where he claimed he was securing angel investors for his startup. He was actually spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on his mistress. Her name is Chloe. She is 24 years old, she works as a personal trainer, and Elijah just signed a year-long lease on a luxury penthouse for her using the exact funds our father stole from my company. Brittany stared at the photographs scattered across my bed. Her breathing hitched, becoming rapid and shallow. Her hands trembled violently as she reached out and picked up a photograph of Elijah kissing another woman on a yacht. The mansion and socialite status she had worshipped were built on absolute lies. Her husband had not just failed her financially, he had humiliated her in the most intimate, degrading way possible. Elijah stepped back, searching frantically for an exit. "Brittany, baby, I can explain everything," he pleaded, his voice cracking with cowardice. "We can fix this." Brittany did not speak. She did not cry. A terrifying dead silence fell over her. She slowly stood up from the floor, her ruined designer dress hanging off her frame. The weeping, helpless socialite vanished, replaced by a woman consumed by blinding feral rage. She let out a guttural, ear-piercing scream. "You lying, cheating, pathetic parasite!" Brittany shrieked. She snapped. Brittany lunged across the hospital room with terrifying speed. Before Elijah could react, she slammed into him, driving her manicured nails directly into his face. Total chaos erupted in the intensive care unit. Brittany swung her fists wildly, pummeling Elijah's chest, neck, and face with relentless, unchecked fury. She screamed curses at the top of her lungs, tearing at his tailored suit, ripping the fabric and popping buttons across the linoleum floor. Elijah threw his arms up, trying to shield his face from her assault, but he was completely overwhelmed by her violent outburst. "Get her off me!" Elijah yelled, stumbling backward and crashing into a medical supply cart. The second police officer sprang into action, wrapping his thick arms around Brittany to pull her off the bleeding man. "Arrest her!" Elijah demanded, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "You saw her attack me. Press charges for domestic assault." The tall officer turned his stern gaze toward Elijah. He grabbed Elijah by his ruined collar and slammed him against the heavy wooden doorframe. "You do not dictate arrests here," he growled, pulling a second pair of steel handcuffs from his heavy utility belt. "You are under arrest for criminal complicity in wire fraud and creating a severe domestic disturbance." He forcefully secured Elijah's wrists next to William, locking them both in permanent disgrace. Suddenly, heavy footsteps began to echo loudly down the hallway. Two fully armed Chicago police officers boldly entered the ICU. Their stern, sweeping gazes locked instantly onto my screaming family. The officer yanked Elijah backward, the click of the handcuffs finalizing his absolute downfall. My brother-in-law, who had strutted through life believing he was untouchable, now directly mirrored my father. They both stood detained, their wrists bound, their faces drained of arrogance. As the officers marched the two ruined men out into the bright hospital corridor, the heavy door swung partially shut behind them, dulling the noise of their loud protests. The reality of the arrests crashed over Cynthia like a tidal wave. She stood trembling in the center of the intensive care unit, her styled hair now disheveled. She looked toward the door, then slowly turned her frantic gaze back to my bed. Her husband was gone. Her golden son-in-law was gone. The absolute control she had ruthlessly wielded had completely evaporated. Cynthia took a hesitant, trembling step toward me. Her knees buckled under the weight of her collapsed empire. She crashed to the cold linoleum floor, crawling the final few feet, until she reached the side of my mattress. She looked utterly pathetic, stripped of her designer armor, and forced to confront the daughter she had gleefully discarded. She gripped the metal bed rail with both hands, her knuckles turning stark white. "Olivia, look at what you have done," Cynthia sobbed, her voice trembling with desperation. "You have destroyed your own family. How can you sit there and be so incredibly evil? We are your blood. I am the woman who brought you into this world. I gave you life, Olivia. You owe me absolutely everything. You owe me your loyalty. You cannot throw your father into a federal prison. You have to call those police officers back right now and tell them you gave William permission to sign those documents." Cynthia was weeping uncontrollably, her tears staining the pristine white sheets covering my legs. "You are punishing us for trying to survive," she wailed, leaning her head against the mattress. "We only wanted to protect our legacy. You have so much money now, Olivia. You are sitting on a massive fortune, yet you choose to be greedy and vindictive. You are tearing apart the very people who raised you. If you have even a single ounce of human decency left in your heart, you will stop this madness. I am your mother. You cannot abandon me like this." I stared down at the weeping woman clutching my bedrail. I felt no elevated pulse, no rush of adrenaline, and absolutely no sympathy. I just looked at her, observing the frantic mechanics of her toxic manipulation. She was deploying the ultimate gaslight, desperately trying to rewrite history to paint herself as a devoted matriarch, and me as a ruthless monster. "I gave you life!" I repeated, my voice perfectly calm, slicing through her hysterical sobbing like a scalpel. "That is your ultimate defense, Cynthia. The biological technicality of my birth. You think sharing DNA automatically grants you the title of a mother. Let me remind you of exactly what your maternal devotion looked like. I want you to cast your mind back to the freezing cold winter I turned 12. Cynthia stopped sobbing, her teary eyes looking up at me in confused silence. "I had contracted a severe case of pneumonia," I said, keeping my tone deadly flat. My lungs were completely filled with fluid. My fever had spiked to 104 degrees. The pediatrician explicitly told you that I needed constant monitoring. Do you remember what you did that weekend, Cynthia? Do you remember where you went while I lay burning alive in my bed?" Cynthia swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the floor. "I remember it with absolute crystal clarity." I continued, leaning slightly forward against my stiff pillows. "Brittany had advanced to the regional finals of a junior beauty pageant in Indianapolis. Instead of staying home to care for your critically ill daughter, you packed a weekender bag. You hired a makeup artist for Brittany. You placed a plastic pitcher of lukewarm tap water on my nightstand, handed me a bottle of generic fever reducers, and you walked right out the front door. You left a 12-year-old child completely alone in a massive empty house for 3 entire days, just so you could watch your golden child walk across a stage in a sequined gown. You did not even call to check on me. You did not ask a neighbor to look in on me. I spent 72 hours hallucinating from the fever, coughing until I tasted blood, and dragging my weak body to the bathroom floor just to cool my burning skin against the tile. I thought I was going to die in that house, and I knew with absolute certainty that you would not care as long as Brittany won a cheap plastic crown. So do not dare kneel beside my hospital bed and invoke the sacred bond of motherhood. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute freezing finality. Do not weaponize the fact that you gave birth to me. You gave me life, Cynthia, but you never gave me a mother. You gave me a ruthless manager who only valued me when I could be exploited for your personal gain. You only remember our biological connection today because the federal government is seizing your stolen assets." Cynthia opened her mouth, but the horrified realization that her manipulation had completely failed paralyzed her vocal cords. She remained frozen on her knees, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. I slowly raised my uninjured right hand and reached toward the plastic console attached to my bed rail. I pressed my thumb firmly against the red nurse call button. A soft chime echoed from the hallway speaker. "Yes, Miss Sterling. How can I help you?" The head nurse's voice crackled through the small intercom. I kept my eyes locked directly onto Cynthia's trembling face. "Nurse, please remove this woman from my room immediately," I instructed smoothly. "Her presence is elevating my heart rate." 3 months had passed since the intensive care unit. The brisk autumn wind whipped through downtown Chicago as I stepped out of my chauffeured car. I paused, adjusting the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit. My broken ribs were completely healed. The fractured wrist was just a fading ache. The physical scars had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable armor of absolute power. I walked up the granite steps of the legal building, my leather heels clicking rhythmically. Mitchell walked beside me carrying a briefcase containing forensic financial audits, forged loan documents, and irrefutable evidence of their federal fraud. Today was not a criminal trial. William and Elijah sat in federal holding cells awaiting court, their bail repeatedly denied. Today was the civil deposition regarding the financial damages caused by their foreclosure scheme. I pushed through the glass doors, projecting the authority of a woman who had reclaimed her empire. We took the private elevator straight up to the quiet 42nd floor. A silent paralegal led us down a long carpeted hallway and gestured toward a glass-walled conference room. A massive mahogany table dominated the room, flanked by plush leather chairs. I took my seat at the head of the table, placing my hands flat on polished wood. Mitchell sat to my right, instantly organizing his files with clinical precision. We waited in the heavy, pressurized silence. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors clicked open. The contrast between my current reality and the figures walking through that door was staggering. Cynthia and Brittany shuffled slowly into the pristine conference room, completely stripped of their artificial glamour. The luxury facade they had aggressively maintained for decades had entirely evaporated. Cynthia looked remarkably frail. Her posture, once haughtily straight, was now deeply hunched. Her artificially colored hair showed graying roots, and the designer clothes she once flaunted were replaced by a wrinkled beige blouse and black slacks. The heavy diamond rings she loved to wave in people's faces were gone, seized by authorities, or pawned to pay for legal fees. Brittany looked even worse. The spoiled, arrogant socialite who had demanded a multi-million-dollar estate was completely hollowed out. Bruised circles framed her sunken eyes. Her skin was pale, devoid of the spray tans she considered a basic necessity. She clutched a cheap canvas tote bag against her chest, her shoulders pulled inward as if trying to shrink away from the bright lights. The spectacular downfall of her fraudulent husband and our criminal father had clearly drained every ounce of vitality from her body. They hesitated by the doorway, staring across the table at me. I did not blink. I did not offer a polite greeting. I simply watched them drag their exhausted bodies toward the chairs opposite mine. Cynthia placed her trembling hands on the back of a leather chair and looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and desperately pleading. "Olivia." Cynthia whispered, her voice cracking. "You look beautiful. You look so healthy." I did not respond to the pathetic attempt at flattery. I maintained my cold, unwavering stare. Cynthia swallowed hard, sinking into her seat. "The banks have frozen everything," she continued, leaning across the table. "They took the cars. They are threatening to evict us from our temporary apartment. Brittany has been crying herself to sleep every single night. We do not have enough money to buy groceries for the week. Please, Olivia, you have won. You have your company back. You have all your money. You proved your point. You do not have to drag us through this brutal civil deposition. Just drop the damages claim." I tilted my head very slightly. "Your grocery budget is irrelevant to this legal proceeding," I replied, my voice slicing through the tense air. "You facilitated a massive wire fraud. You watched while my signature was forged to steal millions. You are here to answer for the financial destruction you supported." Brittany glared at me, a flash of old resentment burning through her exhaustion. "You are a monster," Brittany hissed, her voice weak. "You sit there in your expensive suit while your mother begs for food. You enjoy watching us suffer." "I am enjoying the execution of justice," I corrected. "You wanted to play the game of high-stakes wealth. Now you experience the crushing weight of the consequences." Before Brittany could formulate another insult, the conference room doors swung open. A man marched in, bringing a foul wave of cheap cologne. He wore a poorly fitted pinstripe suit and a predatory smirk. He dropped a battered briefcase onto the table with a loud thud. "Good morning, ladies," he announced, sitting down next to Cynthia. "I am Arthur Vance, lead defense counsel for Mrs. Sterling and her daughter." Mitchell adjusted his glasses. "We have been waiting for 15 minutes, Mr. Vance," Mitchell stated. "I suggest we begin the deposition immediately." Arthur let out a loud, grating laugh. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "We are definitely going to begin," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto mine with a sickening gleam of triumph. "But we will not be discussing the damages my clients supposedly owe you. We are going to discuss exactly how you orchestrated this entire scenario from the very beginning." I narrowed my eyes, refusing to show surprise. "You are speaking nonsense," I replied. "The federal prosecutors already have the digital footprints. My father and your client's husband forged my signature. The proof is undeniable." Arthur leaned forward quickly, his smirk widening. "Oh, I do not deny the signature was forged," he said, popping the latches on his briefcase. "But fraud requires a victim who is actually deceived." He pulled out a heavily redacted document and slid it across the mahogany table. "This is a private email chain between you and a senior banking executive," Arthur announced, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "It clearly proves you knew about the loan application weeks before it finalized. You did not get defrauded, Olivia. You deliberately entrapped my clients." Arthur Vance tapped the redacted document with his thick finger, his smirk widening. "You knew exactly what was happening, Olivia," he accused, his voice booming. "This email proves you were alerted to the commercial lien application weeks before the funds transferred. You sat back, watched your family struggle under immense financial pressure, and deliberately allowed them to proceed. You laid a trap. You orchestrated this entire scenario to finally punish the sister who always outshone you." Brittany sat up straighter, clinging to this narrative. "That is right," Brittany chimed in, her voice desperate. "You have always been jealous of me. You hated that Elijah and I were building a beautiful life while you sat alone in your apartment. You engineered this disaster because you are a miserable, vindictive spinster who wants everyone else to be as lonely as you are." Arthur nodded before turning his gaze back to me. "My clients are victims here," he declared, leaning his forearms onto the mahogany table. "They were desperate, pushed to the brink by your financial withholding. You weaponized your wealth to force your father into a corner, knowing he would take measures to save his family. This is classic entrapment. A judge will take one look at your malicious timeline and throw your entire civil suit into the garbage." Mitchell bristled beside me. He immediately placed his hands flat on the table, preparing to launch a legal objection. I raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. I did not need Mitchell to dismantle this display. I smoothed the lapel of my charcoal blazer and met Arthur Vance's aggressive stare with absolute freezing calm. "Mr. Vance, your theory is as cheaply constructed as your suit," I stated smoothly. "You are relying on a heavily redacted internal notification regarding a preliminary credit inquiry. It proves absolutely nothing about my knowledge of the actual forged wire transfer. However, if you want to establish a definitive timeline of malicious intent, I am happy to oblige." I reached into my leather briefcase and withdrew a thick, spiral-bound dossier. I dropped it onto the table. The heavy thud echoed loudly, making Cynthia flinch. "This is the complete, unredacted digital forensics report regarding the week of the fraud," I announced, flipping the dossier open to a dog-eared page. "Let us review the exact timeline of events. When my father forged my signature and initiated the wire transfer, I suffered a physical collapse. I was bleeding out on the floor of my office. I slid a printed call log across the table directly toward Arthur. While William was busy impersonating me to steal $1.2 million, I called my father's cell phone exactly 14 times. I called Cynthia 6 times. 20 separate frantic calls for help. Every single one was deliberately ignored. Cynthia shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair, her gaze dropping to her tightly clasped hands. "We were busy," Cynthia muttered defensively. "We were in meetings finalizing the estate purchase. We thought you were just calling to complain about work." I flipped to the next page of the dossier and extracted a high-resolution printout. "You were not just busy, Cynthia," I corrected, my voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. You were actively celebrating your theft, and you found my pleas for medical assistance highly annoying. I slid the printed screenshot of Cynthia's text message across the table. It stopped right in front of Arthur Vance. I read the words aloud, ensuring every syllable permeated the tense room. Stop calling us Olivia. We are celebrating Brittany's new mansion and do not have time for your dramatic behavior. Take an aspirin and handle it yourself. The timestamp on that message is exactly 4 minutes after the wire transfer cleared. I was slipping into a coma while you were popping champagne with stolen money. Arthur Vance stared down at the text message. The smirk finally faltered, sliding off his face. I did not lay a trap. I continued mercilessly. I was fighting for my life in an intensive care unit. The only people who orchestrated anything were the thieves sitting at this table. You did not act out of survival. You acted out of pure greed, and you left me to die because my medical emergency was inconvenient to your shopping spree. Brittany shrank back into her chair, the fight completely draining out of her hollow eyes. Arthur cleared his throat, attempting to regain his aggressive footing. Regardless of the unfortunate family communication issues, he stammered, adjusting his collar. William still signed those documents under the assumption that he had implicit verbal authorization to leverage the company assets. It was a misunderstanding, not intentional fraud. Wrong again, I countered, pulling the final, devastating document from my dossier. I slid the certified forensic analysis across the mahogany. This is the official report from an independent handwriting expert commissioned by the federal prosecutor. It conclusively proves that William did not just hastily sign a document. He spent hours practicing my exact signature on separate sheets of paper, which federal agents recovered from his personal shredder. I watched Arthur Vance's eyes frantically scan the forensic report. He read the irrefutable evidence of William's deliberate, premeditated forgery. The expert analysis highlighted the calculated hesitations, the practiced strokes, and the intentional replication of my unique signature loops. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a meticulously planned, highly coordinated federal crime. You claimed I entrapped your clients, Mr. Vance, I stated, folding my hands on the table. But the evidence shows a family of parasites who deliberately conspired to rob me blind, forged my name with practiced precision, and then left me to die on an office floor while they bought a mansion. Arthur Vance stopped reading. He stared blankly at the forensic report, then looked slowly at the text message timestamp. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. The aggressive bluster was entirely gone. He realized with terrifying clarity that Cynthia and Brittany had brazenly lied to him during their consultations. They had hidden the text messages, concealed the 20 ignored calls, and completely fabricated the entrapment narrative. They had handed him a live grenade. Arthur slowly set his heavy gold pen down on the mahogany table. He did not look at Cynthia. He did not look at Brittany. He kept his eyes fixed rigidly on the undeniable proof of their absolute guilt. I really need an immediate recess. Arthur rasped, his voice sounding tight and breathless. He abruptly pushed his leather chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. We need a recess right now, please. Arthur Vance did not wait for a response. He shoved the forensic report back across the mahogany table, grabbed his battered briefcase, and practically sprinted toward the heavy oak doors. Cynthia and Brittany scrambled to their feet, trailing behind him like panicked shadows. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing their absolute defeat. Mitchell calmly collected the files, his expression perfectly neutral. The civil deposition had ended before it even truly began. Within 48 hours, the unredacted transcripts and the forensic evidence were submitted to the federal docket. They immediately became public record. The truth of the federal wire fraud bled into the affluent Chicago suburbs faster than a spilled glass of red wine on white carpet. Wealthy socialites do not read legal briefs, but they absolutely devour scandal. By the end of the week, Cynthia Sterling was no longer the reigning matriarch of the North Shore. She was a radioactive pariah. I witnessed the exact moment her social execution was finalized. I was seated in the corner booth of the Golden Roast, an exclusive artisanal coffee shop in the heart of the village. I was reviewing quarterly projections on my tablet when the bell above the door chimed. Cynthia walked in. She wore an outdated beige trench coat and dark sunglasses, desperately trying to project an aura of unaffected grace. It failed spectacularly. She approached the counter, glancing toward the large circular table in the center of the room. Her usual bridge club was seated there. They were sipping sparkling water and laughing brightly until they noticed her standing there. The vibrant conversation abruptly ceased, leaving a chilling, heavy silence. Four women draped in cashmere and dripping in diamonds. Cynthia plastered a fragile smile onto her face and took a step toward them. "Beatrice?" Cynthia called out, her voice overly bright. "I have been meaning to call you about the charity gala." Beatrice Harrington, a woman who had attended Cynthia's holiday parties for 20 years, did not flinch. She looked directly at Cynthia's face, her eyes entirely blank, and then slowly turned her head back to her latte. The other three women mirrored the exact same freezing gesture. They looked right through her, as if she were made of glass. The barista at the counter cleared his throat loudly. Cynthia stood frozen in the center of the bustling coffee shop, her face turning an agonizing shade of crimson. Her hand trembled as she pulled out her phone, pretending to read an urgent message. I watched her hastily retreat out the glass door without ordering anything. The bridge club immediately leaned inward, their hushed whispers buzzing with toxic delight. I knew exactly what they were discussing. That morning, the board of directors at the Oak Ridge Country Club had issued a unanimous vote. Cynthia and William Sterling were officially stripped of their membership. Their names were physically scratched off the brass donor plaques in the grand foyer. While Cynthia was being physically erased from high society, Brittany was experiencing a brutal digital crucifixion. Brittany had spent years curating a flawless Instagram aesthetic built entirely on the wealth my father had stolen. She loved posting photos of designer handbags, luxury vacations, and champagne brunches. She had accumulated 500,000 followers who fed her desperate need for validation. But the internet is a vicious arena. The moment the federal indictment details leaked, an anonymous local blog published the foreclosure documents. The blog included the eviction notice for the temporary apartment Cynthia and Brittany had been renting. The post went viral. I sat in my office and watched the destruction unfold in real time. Brittany had foolishly posted a sponsored photo of herself holding a supposedly new designer perfume, trying to maintain the illusion that her life was unaffected. The comment section became an absolute slaughterhouse. Within minutes, thousands of comments flooded the post. "Where did you steal the money for that perfume?" one user asked. "Have fun in federal prison," another commented. The eviction notice was pasted repeatedly into her feed. Her followers, who had previously praised her lifestyle, now violently tore her apart. They mocked her cheap apartment, ridiculed her fraudulent husband, and tagged the FBI in her photos. Brittany scrambled to delete the negative comments, but the sheer volume overwhelmed her. She was fighting a tidal wave with a teaspoon. Finally, she was forced to deactivate her entire account. Her entire carefully manufactured digital empire vanished into the void, leaving behind nothing but the humiliating screenshots circulating on local message boards. It was permanently destroyed. The following Tuesday, I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 60th floor. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, a sprawling grid of steel and glass. My company was thriving. The stolen funds were fully recovered, and the board of directors had granted me absolute executive control. My assistant Sarah knocked sharply on the frosted glass door. She stepped into the office, her expression tight with concern. "Miss Sterling, I am so sorry to interrupt your afternoon schedule," Sarah said, clutching her tablet to her chest. I turned away from the window, keeping my posture relaxed. "What is the issue, Sarah?" "There is a woman in the main lobby," Sarah replied, lowering her voice. "Security is threatening to call the police to have her physically removed from the premises." She slipped past the front desk when a large delivery arrived. "She is demanding to see you immediately." I raised an eyebrow, walking slowly toward my mahogany desk. "Did she give a name?" Sarah nodded, looking deeply uncomfortable. "She says she is your sister. She looks terrible, Miss Sterling. She is carrying 2 large trash bags filled with clothes and she is completely hysterical. She is screaming that she has nowhere else to go. I paused, tapping my manicured fingers against the polished wood of my desk. "Let her come up, Sarah," I replied with a chilling smile. "Security can wait. We will let her visit my office." Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding sharply. She turned on her heel and exited the room, the heavy frosted glass door sliding silently shut behind her. I remained standing behind my polished obsidian desk, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting lightly on the cold surface. I looked out the massive windows at the sprawling Chicago skyline, waiting for the inevitable arrival. 2 minutes later, the glass doors parted again. Brittany stumbled into my executive suite. The visual contrast was almost jarring. My office was a fortress of sleek minimalism dominated by sharp angles, dark leather, and brushed steel. Brittany looked like she had crawled out of a dumpster. She was dragging 2 large, heavy black trash bags across the pristine hardwood floor. The plastic snagged and squeaked, leaving a faint trail of dust. Her clothes were disheveled, her designer sweater stained, and stretched her hair matted into a messy knot at the base of her neck. The arrogant sneer that had defined her entire existence was completely erased. She dropped the heavy trash bags. They hit the floor with a dull, pathetic thud. She stood in the center of the vast room, trembling violently. I did not offer her a chair. I did not ask her how she made it past the lobby security guards. I simply stared at her, allowing the silence to stretch and press down on her fragile shoulders. Brittany reached into her oversized canvas tote bag with shaking hands. She pulled out a thick stack of crumpled coffee-stained papers and held them up like a white flag of surrender. "These are divorce papers," Brittany choked out, her voice cracking painfully. "Elijah served them to me this morning from his federal holding cell. His defense attorney advised him to cut all ties with our family to negotiate a lighter sentence. He is facing 20 years in a maximum security prison for the wire fraud, Olivia. 20 years. And he completely threw me under the bus to save himself. He froze all our joint accounts. He legally dissolved our marriage. I have absolutely nothing. I have nothing left. I have nothing, Olivia. I have nothing." I watched her tears spill over her eyelashes, carving wet paths down her pale cheeks. She took a hesitant step forward, clutching the divorce papers against her chest as if they could somehow shield her from the reality of her total destruction. "Mom is gone," Brittany sobbed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "She packed a single suitcase last night and abandoned me at the eviction apartment. She said she found a distant cousin in Florida willing to take her in, but they did not have room for me. She just left me there." The marshals arrived at dawn to lock the doors. "Those 2 trash bags contain everything I own in the world. Every other asset was seized. You have to help me, Olivia. You are my sister. We share the same blood." I was manipulated. Elijah controlled all the finances. Dad orchestrated the entire scheme. Mom poisoned my mind against you for our entire lives. I was just a pawn in their toxic game. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. I am a victim in this tragedy too. You have hundreds of millions of dollars now. You control the entire corporate empire. I am just asking for a tiny fraction of what you have. Just a small loan. A few $1,000s so I can rent a modest apartment and buy some food. Just a small loan to get back on my feet. Please, Olivia. I am begging you on my hands and knees. I am begging you for mercy." Brittany actually dropped to her knees, the harsh impact echoing loudly. She knelt on my hardwood floor, weeping hysterically, the crumpled divorce papers slipping from her grasp and scattering around her knees. She looked utterly broken, a pathetic shadow of the golden child who had once mocked my very existence. I looked down at her. I searched my heart for a single ounce of pity, a single shred of familial obligation, a single flicker of empathy. I found absolutely nothing. The well was completely dry. "You are not a victim, Brittany," I stated, my voice as cold and smooth as glacier ice. "You are a willing accomplice who finally ran out of luck. You happily spent the money Dad stole from me. You eagerly planned your luxury life while I was bleeding out in a hospital bed. You gleefully participated in my destruction, until the exact moment the consequences arrived at your own doorstep. I slowly reached down and unclasped my designer leather purse, sitting on the edge of the desk. I opened my wallet. I pulled out a single crisp $100 bill. I placed it on the smooth obsidian surface and slid it across the desk with one manicured finger. It fluttered lightly before landing near the edge directly in her line of sight. "This is for an Uber," I commanded, echoing the exact cruelty our mother had once weaponized. "Figure it out." Brittany stared at the money, paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated finality of her rejection. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. The realization that she was utterly discarded paralyzed her vocal cords. I pressed the silver button on my intercom. "Security, please escort this unauthorized individual from the building immediately." Within seconds, two burly guards rushed into the executive suite. They grabbed Brittany by her arms, hauling her upward. They dragged her toward the elevators, pulling her miserable trash bags behind her. She did not fight them. She simply wept loudly, her pathetic sobs fading rapidly as they forced her out into the hallway. I stood behind my desk, watching the heavy glass doors slide shut, sealing her fate forever. I turned my back to the empty room, looking out over the magnificent city skyline, feeling absolutely nothing but pure, perfect indifference. 3 months had passed since the intensive care unit. The brisk autumn wind whipped through downtown Chicago as I stepped out of my chauffeured car. I paused, adjusting the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit. My broken ribs were completely healed. The fractured wrist was just a fading ache. The physical scars had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable armor of absolute power. I walked up the granite steps of the legal building, my leather heels clicking rhythmically. Mitchell walked beside me, carrying a briefcase containing forensic financial audits, forged loan documents, and irrefutable evidence of their federal fraud. Today was not a criminal trial. William and Elijah sat in federal holding cells awaiting court, their bail repeatedly denied. Today was the civil deposition regarding the financial damages caused by their foreclosure scheme. I pushed through the glass doors, projecting the authority of a woman who reclaimed her empire. We took the private elevator straight up to the quiet 42nd floor. A silent paralegal led us down a carpeted hallway and gestured toward a glass-walled conference room. A massive mahogany table dominated the room, flanked by plush leather chairs. I took my seat at the head of the table, placing my hands flat on polished wood. Mitchell sat to my right, instantly organizing his files with clinical precision. We waited in the heavy, pressurized silence. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors clicked open. The contrast between my current reality and the figures walking through that door was staggering. Cynthia and Brittany shuffled slowly into the pristine conference room, completely stripped of their artificial glamour. The luxury facade they aggressively maintained for decades had entirely evaporated. Cynthia looked remarkably frail. Her posture, once straight, was now deeply hunched. Her artificially colored hair showed graying roots, and the designer clothes she once flaunted were replaced by a wrinkled beige blouse and black slacks. The heavy diamond rings she loved to wave in people's faces were gone, seized by authorities, or pawned to pay for legal fees. Brittany looked even worse. The spoiled socialite who had demanded a multi-million-dollar estate was completely hollowed out. Bruised circles framed her sunken eyes. Her skin was pale, devoid of the spray tans she considered a basic necessity. She clutched a cheap canvas tote bag against her chest, her shoulders pulled inward as if trying to shrink away from the bright lights. The spectacular downfall of her fraudulent husband and our criminal father had clearly drained every ounce of vitality from her body. They hesitated by the doorway, staring across the table at me. I did not blink. I did not offer a polite greeting. I simply watched them drag their exhausted bodies toward the chairs opposite mine. Cynthia placed her trembling hands on the back of a leather chair and looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and desperately pleading. "Olivia," Cynthia whispered, her voice cracking. "You look beautiful. You look so healthy." I did not respond to the pathetic attempt at flattery. I maintained my cold, unwavering stare. Cynthia swallowed hard, sinking into her seat. "The banks have frozen everything," she continued, leaning across the table. They took the cars. They are threatening to evict us from our temporary apartment. Brittany has been crying herself to sleep every single night. We do not have enough money to buy groceries for the week. Please, Olivia, you have won. You have your company back. You have all your money. You proved your point. You do not have to drag us through this brutal civil deposition. Just drop the damages claim. I tilted my head very slightly. Your grocery budget is irrelevant to this legal proceeding, I replied, my voice slicing through the tense air. You facilitated a massive wire fraud. You watched while my signature was forged to steal millions. You are here to answer for the financial destruction you supported. Brittany glared at me, a flash of old resentment burning through her exhaustion. You are a monster, Brittany hissed, her voice weak. You sit there in your expensive suit while your mother begs for food. You enjoy watching us suffer. I am enjoying the execution of justice, I corrected. You wanted to play the game of high-stakes wealth. Now you experience the crushing weight of the consequences. Before Brittany could formulate another insult, the conference room doors swung open. A man marched in bringing a foul wave of cheap cologne. He wore a poorly fitted pinstripe suit and a predatory smirk. He dropped a battered briefcase onto the table with a loud thud. Good morning, ladies, he announced, sitting down next to Cynthia. I am Arthur Vance, lead defense counsel for Mrs. Sterling and her daughter. Mitchell adjusted his glasses. We have been waiting for 15 minutes, Mr. Vance, Mitchell stated. I suggest we begin the deposition immediately. Arthur let out a loud, grating laugh. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. We are definitely going to begin, Arthur said, his eyes locking onto mine with a sickening gleam of triumph. But we will not be discussing the damages my clients supposedly owe you. We are going to discuss exactly how you orchestrated this entire scenario from the very beginning. I narrowed my eyes, refusing to show surprise. You are speaking nonsense, I replied. The federal prosecutors already have the digital footprints. My father and your client's husband forged my signature. The proof is undeniable. Arthur leaned forward in his chair, his confident smirk widening. Oh, I do not deny the signature was forged, he said, popping the latches on his briefcase. But fraud actually requires a victim who is deceived. He pulled out a redacted document and slid it across the mahogany table. This is a private email chain between you and a senior banking executive, Arthur announced, his voice dripping with satisfaction. It proves you knew about the loan application weeks before it finalized. You did not get defrauded, Olivia. You deliberately entrapped my clients. Exactly 365 days had passed since the heavy oak gavel fell in the federal courtroom. The echoes of that definitive sound still brought me a profound sense of peace. William and Elijah were currently serving their respective 20-year sentences in a federal penitentiary, wearing identical jumpsuits and stripped of the designer suits they had used to disguise their absolute moral bankruptcy. Cynthia was confined to a cramped, dilapidated studio apartment on the neglected outskirts of the city, her entire social empire reduced to coupon clipping and bitter isolation. Brittany had vanished into obscurity, her digital presence permanently erased, her unearned wealth entirely repossessed. They were gone. The toxic shadows that had haunted my entire existence were finally permanently eradicated. In their absence, I did not just survive, I thrived. My corporate empire had expanded exponentially over the last 12 months. The board of directors had unanimously voted to grant me the position of chief executive officer. We had successfully acquired 3 major competitors and launched a revolutionary new financial security platform. I was no longer the overlooked, expendable middle child desperately seeking validation from people incapable of providing it. I was a force of nature. I had fully stepped into my power, commanding boardrooms with absolute authority and steering my company toward unprecedented global success. My corner office on the 60th floor was no longer just a workspace, it was a monument to resilience. I sat in the back of my town car as it glided through the affluent, tree-lined streets of the suburbs. The driver pulled to a smooth stop in front of a sprawling, familiar property. It was the exact same $1.2 million estate that Brittany had illegally purchased with my stolen funds. The courts had seized the property, and liquidated it to pay back the victims of William's wire fraud. I had purchased it back at auction using my own legitimate corporate dividends, but I had absolutely no intention of living in it. As I stepped out of the vehicle, the crisp autumn breeze rustled the golden leaves on the grand oak trees. The house looked fundamentally different. The ostentatious tacky gold trim and excessive marble statues Brittany had commissioned were entirely gone. In their place stood a welcoming, beautifully restored sanctuary. A polished bronze plaque was mounted securely beside the heavy oak front doors. It read, "The Horizon Center." I had spent the last 8 months transforming this monument of vanity and greed into a fully funded comprehensive shelter and mentorship center. We provided safe housing, legal advocacy, and financial literacy training for at-risk youth and young women escaping financially abusive households. The same walls that had once echoed with my sister's arrogant demands now offered a secure haven for people who had been manipulated and discarded by those who were supposed to protect them. I had taken the physical manifestation of my family's ultimate betrayal and weaponized it for good. I pushed open the front doors and walked into the bright, sunlit foyer. The atmosphere was instantly revitalizing. The sterile, competitive tension that used to define my family gatherings was entirely absent. Instead, the air buzzed with genuine warmth and productive energy. Several young women were gathered around a large communal table in the renovated dining room, studying financial planning textbooks and reviewing scholarship applications. When they saw me enter, their faces lit up with authentic, unfiltered joy. There were no calculated smiles here. There were no hidden agendas or transactional relationships. They did not care about the designer label on my coat or the balance in my bank account. They respected me for my mind, my strategic guidance, and my refusal to let them be victimized. A young girl named Maya approached me, clutching a college acceptance letter to her chest. She had come to the center 6 months ago, after her parents had fraudulently opened credit cards in her name, destroying her financial future before her 18th birthday. I had personally assigned my best corporate lawyers to clear her debt and secure her independence. Maya threw her arms around me in a tight, unprompted hug. I hugged her back, feeling a profound, grounding warmth spread through my chest. This was what actual respect felt like. This was what it meant to be valued for your heart and your intellect, rather than your ability to serve someone else's selfish narrative. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing business proposals with the residents, offering them the exact kind of mentorship and support I had been denied my entire life. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the manicured lawn, I stepped out onto the back patio. I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing, looking out over the peaceful grounds. The chaotic, agonizing years of fighting for my family's approval felt like a distant, fated nightmare. For a long time, I had believed that walking away from my parents and my sister meant I was losing my family. I had grieved for the connection I thought I was supposed to have. But standing here listening to the sounds of genuine laughter and support radiating from inside the center, I finally understood the absolute truth. I did not lose a family, I excised a tumor. The people who share your DNA do not automatically earn the right to occupy your life, especially when they systematically orchestrate your destruction. Blood is merely a biological coincidence. It does not guarantee loyalty, and it certainly does not guarantee love. I looked back through the glass doors at the incredible community I had built from the ashes of my betrayal. Family isn't blood. It's who answers the call when the monitor is beeping. It is the people who stand fiercely by your side when the world collapses, who celebrate your victories without jealousy, and who defend your vulnerabilities without hesitation. I turned back to face the horizon. The battle was finally won. I was completely free.